God's been dealing with me for about 4 months on some really specific things. And during the 4 months that he's been opening up things to me, I didn't really understand. It was just pieces. It was just tiny pieces. And until I put them together this last week, a few days before we started our prayer and fasting, it hit me what all of the pieces were for. And then we started our prayer and fasting, and it has been a continual day and night of God just downloading and connecting, and I can't sleep at night. So it was in the urgency, when I realized what this was and the urgency that I felt inside of me, I thought, God, you're not going to let me sleep until I get this out. But he had a certain time, he had a certain place, certain things, very specific things that he wanted to have happen this morning. So if everyone would just be patient with me, this is very new for me, but the peace and confidence that I feel is a peace and confidence that I've never felt in my life. And it's because I know that the things that he's asked me to share are that important. So I'm going to kind of take you on a journey of the last 4 months. And where this journey started and how the Lord got me on the right track of what needed to be said. On February 12th, Kevin and I went to a church down in Clearwater. And there was a pastor there, and he called us up, and he had a word from the Lord that he spoke over us and me. There are specific things for me, there are specific things for him. But the one thing, I kind of understood all of the things that he said, but there was one thing that he said that left me kind of like in music when you have an unresolved note and you're just waiting for it to resolve. That's exactly how I felt, and I thought, I gotta know what this is. And what he said to me was, he said, I don't know what I'm seeing. He said, but I see you standing in a desert. And he said, and you're standing there and you're saying, Lord, we need the rain, we need the rain. Lord, we need the rain. And he said, right behind you. And he said, I mean right behind you, like 100 yards behind you. He said, there was an oasis. And he said, I saw trees, and I saw rivers, and I saw green and lush. And he said, and it's right there. And he said, all you have to do is turn around. And when he said, he said, the Lord's not raining on it on purpose. And that put a real fear of the Lord in me, because I know how much he means to me. And if there's something that he's got for me, and he says, I'm not raining on your desert on purpose, that was the unresolved note. And I thought, oh my gosh, I have to figure out why. And things like that don't settle well with me, because all my life I can't leave things unresolved. It's just, if they bother me. If I'm wiping a table and there's a spot on it and I miss a spot, I have to go back and wipe it because it's like it's unfinished. And so I walked away, and I was perplexed. I was like, God, you have to show me why you're not raining on something in my life, because it means that I'm doing something wrong. Maybe not on purpose. And right after that, and this is really neat, as I was putting this together, I realized as I was going through my notebook, I date everything. When things that are significant happen, I put dates on them and I'll write them. Even if it's just a word that I heard, a quick sentence, I put it on a piece of paper and I put a date on it. And right after that, Mindy the Lord spoke to her and Michael and said, I really feel like we need to do 7 nights of worship. And we did. We were at her house. I was at her house every single night, 7 nights in a row. Didn't miss a night. Well, and guess what came out of that? On February 23rd, which was a Friday, I sat on my porch, because I have Fridays off, and I sat on my porch. Then I said, I'm just going to grab my Bible. And I said, Lord, I'm just going to open up randomly somewhere. And I said, just show me something today. I had no specific agenda. So I opened to Isaiah 58. And I read it, and something stirred in me. And a piece I forgot on this prophecy is, he said, I see this oasis and it's in the east. And that's where I see it. But you just got to turn around. And when I read Isaiah 58, I felt inside of myself a shift. And I thought that this is the key. This is the key to why the Lord's not reigning. I knew it. I felt it. I literally felt a shift in my heart. And I texted Azzy and Minnie. I said, guys, I know which way is east. I know it. I know which way is east because I felt it when I read this. And there were 2 verses in Isaiah 58 the Lord highlighted. And the first one is verse 11. And the Lord shall guide thee continually and satisfy thy soul in drought and make fat thy bones, and thou shalt be like a watered garden and like a spring of water whose waters never fail. Verse 12, and they that shall be of thee shall build the old waste places. Thou shalt raise up the foundations of many generations, and thou shalt be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to dwell in. And I said, God, that's where it is. And when I read that, I thought, oh, that's it. But as I pondered, I thought, oh, well, that's it. I know what it means. Well, no, the Lord wasn't done yet, because February 27th, it was probably 5 in the morning. I was laying in bed. And I knew I was in bed. I opened my eyes, and I could see my window. I could see my room. But then suddenly I was somewhere else. And I was seeing something else. And then I would come back, and I would be in my room, and I thought, wait, no, am I dreaming? And I thought, no, I know I'm not dreaming because I'm seeing where I'm at. But then I'd go somewhere else. And I thought, okay, there's something here. And in my mind, I'm just trying to figure out what's going on. But then I permanently stay in that other place. And I was standing, and what I saw, I was standing near the corner of a building. And it was made of, like, I could tell it was old because it was like brown, kind of like you'd do a cinder block house, but it was brown, like old stones. And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, what am I seeing? And then I saw a man standing there. And he was standing there at his back to me, and in his hand he had this long stick. And I'm still like, what does this mean? And he turns to me and he said, it's okay. He said, I'm measuring my church. I'm measuring the temple. And he kept saying that over and over. He said, I'm measuring my temple. I'm measuring the church. And I stood there, and there was such a peace. And it's like I understood. I stood there and I thought, okay. And then when I came out of this, I don't know if you'd even call it a night vision. I've never had this happen before. I was back in my room, And I could feel from the top of my head down through my body waves, physical waves. And every time a wave would roll through my body, it was comfort, a comfort that I've never felt before. And after feeling that, when Jesus said, I have to go away to send you the Comforter, I know what that feels like, because it was that strong. And it was that feeling that stayed with me. And to this day, every time I think about that, I can feel those waves of comfort. They roll, and they roll, and they roll through me. And that God said, that was his way of saying, Jenny, no, this was significant. There's something to this. And as I was waking up, I laid there, and in my mind, I knew I needed to start studying the temple or in the tabernacle. And I thought, okay, I don't know why, but I need to start diving into that. Well, it wasn't but very shortly after this dream that as I was reading one day that he brought me to Amos chapter 9, verse 11 and 12. Because at this point, I was like, okay, you're measuring the church. What does that mean? Well, he gave me the answer. And it says, in that day will I raise up the tabernacle of David that is fallen, and close up the breaches thereof, and I will raise up his ruins, and I will build it as in the days of old, that they may possess the remnant of Edom, and all of the heathen which are called by my name, saith the Lord that doeth this. And when I read that verse, I said, oh my gosh, it started to become clear. Because when I read in Isaiah, it said that the people were going to build up the old waste places and repair the breaches. But as I pondered on Isaiah 58, I said, well, what are we repairing? What are we restoring to? Because if you're going to repair or restore something, you have to have an original pattern to know how you're supposed to do it. And he answered me in Amos. He said, I'm going to raise up the tabernacle of David that's fallen. And that sent me, I thought, okay, I know exactly which temple or tabernacle that I need to be studying. And one thing about both of those verses, there is one word in there that really stuck out because it's in both of them. In Isaiah it says, you're the repairer of the breach. And then in Amos it says, and close up the breaches. And I thought, the first thing I need to understand is, what is a breach? And I think naturally everyone says, oh, it's a gap. You have a dike and there's a hole in it and water's coming out. So I looked up the definition of breach, and there were 4 of them. But the Lord said, here's the one that I need you to pay attention to. Breach: to act in disregard of laws, rules, contracts, or promises. And I thought, wow, there's something to that. And again, I had no clue. I wasn't putting all the pieces together. You gotta understand, I'm getting this in pieces. I just keep writing, and I keep dating my pages when things come up that I feel are significant. And so began my extensive study of the tabernacle of David, because I thought, why did you say the tabernacle of David? Why not the tabernacle of Moses? Why not Solomon's? Why not Solomon's? Because it was so great. But he was very specific. He said, no, what I'm going to restore is a tabernacle of David. And I thought, okay, there's something there. So that's what I did. And as I got into studying that, I had to know specific things. I said, okay, I need to know, where was this tabernacle? What was in this tabernacle? What did they do in this tabernacle? And how did it get there? Because if I'm going to understand, if I'm supposed to be rebuilding this tabernacle, then I have to know every single aspect of what I'm doing. Because you can't repair something unless you know what you're doing. And you can't restore it. So I'm just going to touch on some highlights of things. The tabernacle of David was a tent. And when David conquered Mount Zion, that's where he built the city of David, which is just right outside Jerusalem. And he put this tent on Mount Zion. He said, I got to keep God close to me. Well, in Moses' tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant sat behind the veil. And during that time, there was a time that when Israel would go out and fight, they would take the Ark of the Covenant with them and carry it with them. Well, they lost a battle, and the Philistines stole the Ark of the Covenant. And one thing that's very key and important that I need to tell you is what the Ark of the Covenant represents is a presence of God. So every time I say Ark of the Covenant, we're referring to the presence of God, because that ark sat in the holiest of holies. And only certain people, it was so holy that there were so many rules about who could go in and who couldn't, and exactly how you went in. So they would carry this out with them when they battled, because the presence of the Lord was there in the battle. Well, they lost a battle. The Philistines stole it. The Philistines brought it into their camp. And it was there for a very short amount of time, because people started dying. All these plagues started happening, and they said, you know what? We cannot have this thing here. So they built a cart. They put it on a cart. They hitched an ox or an animal to it, and they said, just go, but just get out of here. Just get out of here, because we can't handle this. We can't handle the presence. Well, this cart, it wanders, and it lands in another city, and it gets put in a house. And it sits in this house for 20 years. So about the time that David, he's conquered Mount Zion, and he says, I got to get the presence by me. He says, you know what? I know where the presence is. It follows that ark. So he said, I got to get this close. So he said, okay. He called out and he said, hey, let's get this. So the two brothers in the house that was in, they built a brand new cart. They put the ark on the cart. Everyone was excited because, hey, this is going to happen. It says that the oxen that is pulling it, and it's coming, and it gets to a spot, and names, I don't have this, I'm just particular names, but it gets to a threshing floor. And the oxen stumble, and the ark starts to slide. And a man named Uzzah, whose house this sat in, reached out his hand to touch it, to catch it. And it said, and when he did that, it said, God struck him instantly and he died. And I'm thinking, oh, this is such a great story. Well, then we got to that part, and it struck some fear in me. And I thought, what went wrong? Because they were doing something good. You know, he was obeying. David said, bring it. And I thought, oh. And God said, you need to pay attention to this, because this is what you need to focus on. And I have to tell you, when I read that, it puts a fear on you, because you think, wow, we're talking about the presence of God, and God can be that quick, just like that. So he said, you got to go deeper. You got to go deeper with this. So I thought, well, so I did. I started diving into Exodus, and I thought, I got to know everything about this Ark of the Covenant. So I found out that when Moses gave instructions on how it was to be built and how it was to be handled, the way it was supposed to be moved was with poles on the shoulders of the Levites. And I thought, aha, God isn't just a harsh, evil God. And then I read that one of the rules was that no human hand would touch it. And he said, and if you do, you'll die. And I thought, and it took that fear of, oh my gosh, how can I trust God? And it turned it into, I know I can trust God, because if he says it and he writes it, you better believe that it's going to happen. Because how can I trust a God that when he says something and says, oh, he had a good heart, he was trying. He can't do that, because then what happens is I can't trust when he says all the promises that he gives me. So specifics are very important with God. And paying attention to detail is very important to him. So then I understood. And then I thought, boy, this is really something, because when you read this story, when that happened, it said David had a fear of God. And that really struck me, because I thought, David was a man after God's own heart. He and God have been tight since they were he was a kid in the field with the sheep. And I thought, he had the same fear that I just felt. And I thought, how? And I just said, Lord, how did he recover from that? Well, the Lord, and I thought, I bet I'm going to find it somewhere in Psalms, because the man that had this actually happened to, he wrote a whole lot of stuff. And so I just said, Lord, I'm going to start going through Psalms. And when I got to Psalms 19, he said, Jenny, here's your answer. And this is Psalms 19, verse 7 through 14. And when I read these words, it took that fear of God and turned it into the fear of the Lord. And let me read to you what it says in Psalms. It says, the law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The statutes of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. And the fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is thy servant warned, and in keeping of them there is great reward. Who can understand his errors? Cleanse thou me from secret faults. Keep back thy servant also from presumptuous sins. Let them not have dominion over me. Then shall I be upright, and I shall be innocent from the great transgression. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. And when I read those words, the peace of God, I can't even tell you, I was sitting on my porch again, and the peace of God, I understood. I said, God, I could explain that to your people, because it changed when I understood the purpose of the laws of God and the importance of that. And so when you read in 2 Samuel 6, which is a story of how they get the ark, well, they had made one attempt and miserably failed because they didn't pay attention to the details. So then they make another attempt. And what happened when the first failure happened? David said, I shouldn't be doing this. They stuck it in the home of a man named Obed-Edom. And he was scared. Again, remember, he had a fear of God, and he walked away and said, I don't know. I don't know what's going on here. I thought I was doing the right thing. I imagine his mind was just like, this guy just died on my watch. And it said it sat in the home of Obed-Edom for 3 months. And I feel like whatever the Lord was talking to him, David knew how to talk to the Lord. He knew him. And for those 3 months, I bet he was searching his heart. He was searching the scriptures. And the end result was Psalms 19, 7 and 14. He understood the purpose of the law. He understood why he needed it. And then he also studied those scriptures and said, aha, he wasn't supposed to touch it, and it's supposed to be carried differently. So it says, and in here it's like one or two verses. He goes from having a fear of God, and it says, someone came to David and said, David, we got to tell you, this ark is sitting in Obed-Edom's house, and you wouldn't believe the blessings that are happening. For 3 months, this guy was blessed and blessed and blessed and blessed, and he was so blessed that it got the attention of everyone around. He was in a different town. He wasn't in the same place as David. And they said, David, come on. Like, he's blessed. I think the Lord says it's okay. We can do this. And at that time, it says that he went to get the ark with gladness. And I thought, that 3 months of searching his heart changed him. It totally changed him and his whole perspective of God and how he needed to handle, and again, the ark, and we're talking about the presence. It changed him. And then the Lord said, Jenny, I need you to, there's still something deeper in this part of the story you need to find out. He said, it's important that you learn about the players in this story. He said, because you need to find that out. And so I thought, okay. So I went back and just studied and found out about, I thought, well, I need to find out. It sat in this house for 20 years. Who were these people? And I was absolutely astounded when I found out where it sat for 20 years. Uzzah was a Levite. When that first cart rolled into that city when the Philistines left it, it went to the home of a Levite. And what is the purpose what was the Levite's job? It was to handle the Ark of the Covenant. There were specific things. They were a tribe that was so set apart. And I thought, oh my gosh, they should have known. And then I'm putting myself in their shoes, and I thought, here I am. I have the Ark of the Covenant, the presence of God that would win battles, the presence of God that only certain people could touch, and it's in my living room for 20 years. Well, what happened in that 20 years? And then I started thinking, I thought, well, it doesn't say how old these people are, but naturally, if I'm going to have something really heavy and have a hard job, I'm going to pick a younger person because they have more strength. Then it got me thinking, these brothers could have been 20 years old. They could have been teenagers. Maybe they were 30. But the point God was making was, and I thought, there's a possibility that nobody in Israel saw demonstrated how to handle the presence in 20 years. And I thought, these guys could have been 20, and it could mean that their whole life, it was never demonstrated. It might have been talked about, but it was never demonstrated. But God says, my presence is that great, and my word is that true, and when I say something, I mean it. And it just astounded me. I thought, how in the world could that happen? Well, then I studied Obed-Edom. And what I found, again, astounded me. Obed-Edom wasn't of any of the tribes. He was considered a Gentile. And if you know the rules of Moses' tabernacle, only the Levites can handle the ark. But for some reason, when it got put in his home, he understood what he had. He understood the presence, and maybe it was, and again, I'm just, in my mind, I'm just thinking, okay, if I'm him and this thing shows up and some guy's just died and the Philistines can't even keep it, I'm thinking, I better be pretty careful here because I really don't want to lose any family members. But what did it say in 2 Samuel 6? It said he was so blessed that the towns and everywhere around, he respected the presence of the Lord. And I just thought, oh, that's amazing. It hit me like a ton of bricks. And it showed that God says, I'm God. And if I want to break tradition, guess what? I will. Because if the people who were called by my name to handle my presence don't respect it, well, guess what? I'll find somebody else. And it may not even be someone that's in the tribe. And again, this whole thing is a reflection of, it was a foreshadowing of the new covenant that we live in. Because it said anybody could come to the presence. So David went and he got he went and he got it, and he knew, he was sure this time because he knew exactly what he had to do. So he went and he got that, and it says with gladness, he got the Levites, they put it on their shoulders, and and every few steps they would stop and sacrifice, and then they'd move again, and they'd stop and they'd sacrifice, and then this whole time they're singing and dancing and music going while it's moving, because he got it right and he knew exactly what to do. And that's why he could with gladness. And it says when he got to the entrance of the city of David, it said he was dancing so wildly that his wife was looking out of a window and said, oh my gosh, what is he doing? But he didn't care, because he said, I got it right and I understand God. I understand God. And I can dance this wildly, and I can be this animated, and I can just spin, and because I know it. I'm so sure of it. I know it. And then I found out something else. I thought, oh, they get it up there. It's in the tent. And then I thought, well, where's the veil? Because it doesn't say anything about a veil. I thought you weren't supposed to be able to look at the ark. I thought it was always supposed to be behind a veil, because in Moses' tabernacle, when it sat there, only the high priest could go. And I thought, it doesn't say anything about a veil. And I searched and searched and searched, and I couldn't find a veil. And I thought, there was no veil. And do you know, when that got put in place, as soon as it got there, they did one sacrifice. And then after that, there was no more sacrifice of blood. In the tabernacle of David, it was a sacrifice of praise and worship and singing and clapping. And I thought, how could they do that? But simultaneously, with the ark being in one location, the tabernacle of Moses was still there, and the veil was still there, and they were still performing all of the things they were supposed to, because they knew they had to. But his presence had moved somewhere else. And what this whole story was revealing to us was God was gonna break tradition, and he needed to have a span in time that people could see that. And it sat, once that sacrifice was there, it was on Mount Zion under David's rule for 33 years. And it says the praise and the worship and the thanking didn't end night and day. He set up He did teams. He had musician teams. He had recorder people that would write things down, and then he taught them how to. He had singers, and they all had their jobs, so that he said it's so important. This presence is so important that 24 hours a day we have to be worshiping the Lord. And he set this up, and he trained people. And then it hit me. Jesus walked this earth for 33 years. What this temple was, this was a way of showing God's people that when the time came, they could say, hey. Because if you read in the New Testament, one of the disciples, when they went out after they had been filled and with the Holy Ghost and they were sent out, some of them were assigned to go out to the Gentiles. And that was a big no-no, because under the Old Covenant, this word was for the people of God. But one of them said, wait a minute. I remember something. I remember Amos. He wrote about, and it says, that they may possess the remnant of Edom and all of the heathen, which are called by my name, saith the Lord. And that was God's window. And he said there was a time with David, and as he studied the scriptures, he said, guys, we can go to the Gentiles. And you know why? I don't think it's an accident that he said, I'll possess a remnant of Edom. Remember, Edom was not of the tribes. But as I studied further about this man, when the ark left his house and went to the tabernacle, he moved his entire family because he said, I can't get away from this. And do you know, when you read through all the details and all of the people, do you know what God allowed him to do for 33 years and his family? David assigned them as doorkeepers to the tabernacle of David. That's unheard of. It's supposed to be the Levites. How can this man do that? And God said, you know what? I'm God. And those who will honor my presence, I will break tradition if that's what it takes. And it was so many things, because not only was it a foreshadowing, that needed to happen because those disciples needed to have a sign to say, listen, we can do this because God did it before and we see it. And this just, I was so fascinated. I could not believe the details that came out of this. And then God said, Jenny, you're looking way too close at this. And I have to tell you, a few weeks ago, again, sitting on my porch, I do that a lot. I was sitting on my porch reading, and all of a sudden I heard this loud, just screeching, and I looked up, and there was this giant hawk circling right above my head, and he was screeching. Every time he circled, he would screech again, and it was so noticeable that I was like, what is going on? And I looked, and then as I watched him, and it was just beautiful because you could see the detail of his wings, and I was just awestruck. I thought, oh my gosh. And then he'd go a little bit higher, and he'd circle again. Then he'd go a little bit higher, and he would circle again, and then he got further and further away, and he kept circling, and then he went up. And the Lord said, Jenny, I need you to come up higher, because there is something you're not seeing, because you're looking at this too closely. And then it hit me. This was about the church. The lesson in the story was about the church. And then the fear of God really hit. And I thought, oh Lord, what are you saying? Because as I went through that story, I tell you, it was like the two-edged sword had to go in and cut out and make me understand why that man died. And I thought, wow, this is about our church. And the weight and the heaviness that fell on me. And I just thought, what are you wanting me to do, God? Because this sounds pretty severe. This is heavy. But he said, it's urgent. It is urgent. And so I said, well, Lord, if this is something that at some point you want me to share, then I have to know how to explain it, because the fear that I felt of God, and then which changed to the fear of the Lord, I said that was a hard process, because I wrestled. I'm just going to tell you, I wrestled, because there are things in the Bible that God says, I want you to wrestle with it. Because while you're wrestling, I'm going to clean things out, and I'm going to make things clear. So the wrestle is important. And I had been I go to a little Bible study with different ladies around town, and one of them said something Tuesday night, and it hit me, and I thought, oh, I've never thought about God in that way. She said, God has both male and female traits. And I thought, oh, yeah, that's kind of cool. She said, you know how in the Word you'll read, and she said it says, He's our Father. But she said, then you read about wisdom, and you read about other things, and it calls it a she. And I thought, oh, I think I've kind of known that, but I didn't really put it together. And I thought, that is so neat, because that's kind of what I learned from this story, that there is a harsher, and there's a side that are requirements, but then there is such a love side to God that I'm like, man. And she said, and you have to see all of it if you're going to see the full counsel of God. And I thought, that is just cool. It was neat. And the very next day I was at work, and my boss was talking about his little girl, and he said, we get out and we play, and he said, but then sometimes, she's 3, and I get a little blood pressure goes up, and I'm like, okay, I need to settle down now, and then he said, and then she goes running to her mom's skirt, and, pouting, and I thought, and the Lord said, Jenny, remember what Margaret said? And I thought, oh my gosh, God, I know how I can explain this to the people. It's like a mom and a dad. And the side of God that is about His commandments and His rules and the things that you need to do and the things that are stern and the things that need to come out, as it says here, for correction. But then there's this other side that is so much love and so much mercy. And it's like the mom. You have to have the dad, but you also have to have the mom, because when you're wrestling and you come to something hard, it's like the dad saying, hey, you need to listen to me. But he lets you run to the skirt and to the mercy and the love. And this story I just told you, that tabernacle, you know what that represented? Was Jesus. And what did He do for us? We don't live under the old covenant and the rules that they had, and things were pretty harsh, and it got pretty bloody. But you know what? Someone's blood was shed, that we have mercy. So it's that comfort. You need both of them. And if you don't, it's like a child that is raised by just a dad. They're going to miss a piece of the love that a mother brings, if that's the main influence in their life. And then you can have a child that only is raised by a mother, and you're going to get so much love, but you're going to maybe miss some of the lessons that you need to learn. So if a child is raised and they don't have the full counsel, which is what God made from the beginning, He created man and woman. He needed both. He said, if you want to see my whole counsel, you need both. Because from the foundations of the world, that is what I established. And that's how you see me clearly, is by having both. And then as I went higher, just like that hawk did, I thought, this is, wow, this explains a lot. And what I wrote down here, this church and the people that are in it, and the people that are in my mom's generation, my parents' generation, God was the one that wooed them. And I know that. And you know how I know that? It's because I know my mom. And for 40 years, I've been able to be close to that heart. And I know how careful she is. And I know that that what she felt, I know it's real. I know it was real. But our church, we started off on that solid foundation of the mom and the dad and the love. And there's no doubt in my mind, as I have known so many of these people in the generation before me, I know it. I've always known it. I've known it since I was a kid. But when a child is raised with either one or the other, without one of the sides, it's out of balance. And that's what God said, Jenny, this is what I'm trying to tell you. This church started off with the full balance and counsel of God. But something changed, something went out of balance. And for years, we learned the law. And the law is not a bad thing. But just having the law and missing the love, do you know what starts happening? The law in the old covenant was never supposed to perfect anything. It was never going to work. It's why we needed Jesus. And I thought, okay, this explains. It was the reconciling that I did in that story. The Lord was starting to reconcile in my heart of where I've been and the things that I felt. And there's things in my past that I know are so true. And as I've studied all of these things, I thought, I know the word. Like, I just know, things will pop into my head and I'll know where they're at and I go right to them. And for me personally, when I look back, since I was 8, I've loved the Lord and I've loved His word and I learned so much of it. And I can't look back and say, things got really off here. Things got very out of balance here. But it's to be expected, because if you don't get the whole counsel, and I have told my mom so many times over the last 3 years, I said, don't you ever apologize to me for where you've been and how I got here, because Mom, I know your heart. And I know the decisions that you made them because you felt that they were right. And so this is a little bit hard. But what I learned through all of this, you have to have both. You can't, I honestly, I can't throw away my previous years, because it got me to the understanding of the word that I have right now. Because now these last 3 years, what I've learned about the love has changed me. And then the Lord said, I need you to go back in the Old Testament somewhere else. And I need you to read about this. And it's in 1 Kings. And it's the story of Ahab. And Ahab was the king. He was of the lineage of David. You know, he was coming from the right people. But when I started reading about him, it said, but he did evil in the sight of the Lord. And I thought, well, what did he do? And the one thing that it says that he did is he said he married Jezebel. And Jezebel was a worshiper of Baal. And what that did to this lineage of kings that were supposed to come down from David is it brought in a spirit of worshiping idols, because that's what she was. If you read, it was what she was about worshiping other idols. And the other thing about Jezebel that you can read in there is she relentlessly hunted down the prophets to kill them. She relentlessly wanted to kill the word of the Lord. And that got me thinking. I thought, yeah, we were out of balance. We were way out of balance. And you know why? And what I have to say with this is we didn't realize it. So as it goes on this story, it talks about things got really whacked with Ahab because he was so out of balance. And the Lord sent Elijah to Ahab, and he said, Ahab, it's going to quit raining. It's going to stop raining. And he said, and it's not going to start raining until I say it. He didn't even put a time limit on it. He said, because what you did and what you corrupted, this lineage of David, God is not pleased. And if you're not worshiping God and you're not honoring the presence, that's a big deal to the Lord. We know that because of what we read about the man dying. That was a really big deal, but yet it was God's people. So God, and I'm thinking, he's looking down and going, I got to do something. But because of my word, I'm going to have to pull my presence off of God's people for a while, because I can't keep it there because they are directly disobeying what I told them. And so he pulled it off. And that started a drought. And not only was it a drought, it says it was a severe drought. And it goes on and it says, at the end of that 3 years, Elijah again said he went back, and there's a lot to this story. I got to get through some of this quickly, but God said it's time now. And so he went back, because it wasn't going to rain until Elijah said it. So he went back, and he went up. They went to Mount Carmel. He had a servant with him, and they went up to Mount Carmel. And it says Elijah got on the ground on his hands and knees, and he was going to start calling for the rain. And he sent his servant to the very top of the mountain. He said, go up there and look, see if you see it yet. And he come down. He said, no, I don't see it. He said, well, go again. See if you see it. Comes down again. He did this 7 times. He sent him up there. This whole time, Elijah's on the ground, and he sends his servant up. And on the 7th time, the servant runs back, and he said, I saw a cloud. He said it was the size of a man's hand. Do you see my hand? Does it look like a big, could he possibly have been seeing something really big? No. If that's how the servant described it, I'm talking it must have been a little tiny puff in the sky. But as soon as Elijah heard it, he said, I know it's going to rain. I know it's going to rain. Three years ago, we entered a severe drought. Not just a regular drought, a severe drought. But the imbalance that we had, God said, I love my people so much that I have to do something drastic. I have to do something so drastic. And it's not like God was wanting to harm us, but because his word is so sure, he had to pull the hand and say, hey, listen, I got to get your attention because I love you so much and I have so much mercy. I have so much mercy for you, but you're not seeing it. And what the Lord spoke to me, he said, the reason I needed to take you to these stories is because for 3 years, he said, this church has been in the same position that David was in for 3 months when he was trying to figure out what happened. And he said, and this church has been in the same position for 3 years as the children of Israel were during that drought. And what was the purpose of the drought? Was it just God being harsh? Was God saying, I've totally left you? No, he said, I know my people. I know their hearts. I know where they started. And I love them so much that I have to do something. And what has happened for this 3 years is the Lord has had that double-edged sword. And just like that spirit of Jezebel that was there and that worshiping of idols, idols can represent so many things. And you can not even be part of a church and you can have an idol. But the whole point is, when you don't honor the presence of the Lord, his presence can't stay. And our church had become a church that the Ark of the Covenant sat in that corner over there. And we missed it. And we're like, oh, the presence is here because the Ark's in the room. No. Because when Jesus came, it didn't become about an actual physical thing. It became about our hearts. And that presence and that honoring of God was supposed to be in our hearts. And when you lose focus of that, that's what happened. And the Lord wants to say, quit blaming yourself because you didn't understand the love side. You were out of balance. And I know that you didn't understand the love side. And my way of teaching you how to correct yourself so that you can be sure and that you can pick up that ark and put it on your shoulders and you can run to the presence of God with gladness, spinning wildly while you do it, is because of the correction that I've sent you. And the Lord gave me it was so important. It was so important. It was so important to him that the things that I would say, you would understand because he loves us that much. And he said, and I'm going to tell you, this is a situation that comes up a lot. We own a repair shop. And very regularly, people will come in and they will bring a mower in, and they'll say, man, I was mowing, and the thing just quit. I don't know why, can you fix it? We're like, sure, we'll fix it. They'll say, well, we don't know, the engine, there's something wrong with the engine. So we get it in. Well, the first thing that and my husband's so amazing because he's such a diagnostic person, and he can look at stuff and just have a sense of what's wrong before he even gets into that engine, because he has seen different failures. And he'll say, I suspect it could be this or it might be this. And I hear him do this every day because he's so experienced. And when he gets that machine and he looks at it, he says, I suspect that it could be this. But then he realizes, wow, that is really deep in the engine. And I'm thinking it's only a $5 part. But man, the amount of work that it's going to take for me to verify that, it's going to be expensive. So you know what the rule is at our shop? If someone brings in a piece of equipment and he realizes that it's going to be a high cost, you know what he does? He asks permission from the owner. And he says, hey, listen, I think I know what's wrong with it. I'm not 100% positive, but the only way I'm going to find out is if I tear that engine apart. And once I have it apart, I'm going to visually be able to see where the failure was. Because he said, you don't just want me just to order parts. Because if I don't tear it apart, I'm just going to say, okay, well, let me order a gasket, and then I'll order, maybe I'll order a carburetor. And I'm going to order all these parts, and it's going to cost all this unnecessary money. So he calls him, and he says, listen, it's going to be a little expensive because if it is what I think it is, it's not a real expensive part, but the expensive part is finding out why and disassembling. And I thought, yeah. Searching a heart can cost a lot. Finding the root problem can be expensive. And it may be something so simple, but there's no way to know for sure unless you tear it apart. And I feel like what God, the mercy that He's had on this church for 3 years, is He's given us a chance to tear that engine apart. Because we don't want to guess, because that's too risky. And it can cost in all sorts of other ways. So we have to be sure. Because we want to get it right. And once he identifies the problem, he puts a part in. What does he do? He reassembles it. And when he does, that machine fires up, and man, it goes out to do exactly what it's supposed to do. But you have to take the time. You have to care enough to say, yeah, I don't want to just patch it. I want to do that. Because then the longevity, you might kind of fix it, but it's going to fall apart again because you didn't identify the actual root of the problem. And God said, Jenny, this church couldn't even consider rebuilding until they identified what the problem was. And until they knew what the problem was, and then was given the blueprint of what they were supposed to do, and how to rebuild, because how do you rebuild if you don't even know what you're aiming for? And the thing that ties all of this together is it's all about honoring the presence of God. And it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter where you came from. The important part is that you honor the presence. And it's so important that you can't not, because there are rules. And God has certain things. And God, we're not required to do all those tiny tasks because Jesus came. And you know what he said? On these two things hang all the law and the prophets. To love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength. And what's the second one? To honor your neighbor. When you're out of balance, and you're on the law side, guess who gets dishonored? Your neighbor. Because it's all about the law, and you're trying to hold them up to something that God said that old covenant would never perfect. But again, if you run over here and you say, okay, I was here and it was so harsh and I was so hurt, I'm going to run over here. Oh, the love is so good. And oh my gosh, that love is so good, and it is nothing to be taken granted because it was costly for our Savior. But if you stay here, guess who gets dishonored? God does. Because suddenly, you're worshiping idols. And I thought, where do we need to be? I need to be right here. Because I have to have the law. I have to have the correction of the Lord. But I have to have the love. And when I do, guess what? I am fulfilling the two things that God said, hang all the law and the prophets. Because on this side, I'm honoring God with everything in me. And on this side, I'm treating my neighbor and not judging and treating them like I should. And this just, I couldn't believe what I was reading. And it was pieces. It came in pieces over like 4 months. So a week ago, it was a Friday morning. It wasn't a few days ago, but the Friday before, when I was waking up, as I opened my eyes, I heard Psalms 91. And I was like, Psalms 91, okay, what does that mean? Where are we going today, Jesus? Because I know it's something, because this is, you're hunting, you're chasing me down. Well, I read the whole chapter, and I know everybody in this room is familiar with Psalms 91 because it is one of the most incredible chapters in Psalms. And if you get right the things that it says in Psalms 91, the blessings and the things that you are able to hold on to are so amazing. It's just amazing. But there was the first 4 verses is what the Lord really highlighted that he wanted me to bring out. And it says, he that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in him will I trust. Surely he will deliver thee from the snare of the fowler and from the noisome pestilence. He shall cover me with his feathers, and under his wings shalt thou trust. His truth shall be thy shield and buckler. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've read this chapter and those verses so many times, but it hit me. I said, David wrote this. And I've been studying the tabernacle of David. There was no veil. David knew all about the secret place because he was able to enter the presence for himself. And it says, he that dwelleth, you'll be under the shadow of the Almighty, that tent. When he got into that tent, it shadowed him. Because remember, the Ark of the Covenant represents the presence of God. And for that window of time, because he was such a man after God's own heart, he said, you care so much that I'm gonna give you the opportunity to see what this feels like, because a time's coming that it can live in your heart, but it's not for you. But you have sought me so much that I'm going to do this for you. And then I kept reading, and in verse 4 it said, he shall cover me with his feathers. Well, if you know about the Ark of the Covenant, the top of it is 2 cherubims with wings. David was able to get right next to that, and he knew what it felt like to hover literally under those wings. And then it says, his truth shall be thy shield and buckler. Do you know what was in the Ark of the Covenant? The tablets of stone that God himself with the finger of God wrote was in that ark. He knew when he was in trouble, he knew where to find the presence. He knew what the presence was all about. And he knew that the word that God spoke, because God challenged his heart as he was bringing it to that tabernacle, he understood the truth. And those stones that were in there, he said, I know I can count on them. And I can hold them up like a shield, because he never fails. And it was just, I thought, I've never read these verses like this before. This is amazing. And this is a part that God said, I need you to address some things, and I need to address some people. And he said, and you got to be very specific about it. And so he said, I need you to address the first generation. And he said, I need you to tell them something. I know where you started, because it was me. I know it. You were mine. And your ground was so good. It was so good. He said, but you know what? I wasn't the only one who knew that. The enemy knew how good that ground was. And what was Jezebel? What was her thing? She wanted to, whoosh, we gotta stop this. You can't see the whole council. We gotta get rid of some things. But the Lord wants to say today to the first generation is, you came from truth. You came from a solid foundation. You just didn't have the whole counsel. And he says, quit beating yourself up, because I sent my son, and there's mercy. And I love you so much that if you will look back through your life and the places that you've been, my hand has woven through your life. And as the enemy knew how good that ground was, he thought, I have to stop this. And not only did 3 years ago, did the church break up, we were shredded. We were shredded. And to the second generation, he said, tell them, your parents came from good ground. Mistakes were made, but you know what? They're your parents. And everything that they did, they didn't get off balance because they wanted to. They just didn't have the whole counsel. So have patience with them. Show them some mercy, because they cleared a path that you wouldn't have been able to clear. God had a certain work for this first generation that they needed to do. And every generation that God raises up, there's a specific thing that he builds into their DNA of what they're supposed to do. And as God is saying, first generation, you are mine. And I've always known how good your ground was. And second generation, you need to recognize that. But there are some in the second generation that, just like the Levites, had the ark in their home, but they didn't know what to do with it because they hadn't been shown the right way. And so he speaks to the first generation and says, you need to have patience with the second, because things got off balance and they didn't fully understand how to handle the presence. But second generation, I have to give you a warning. You were raised over here, but you can't run over here. Because if you say, man, my life was so harsh, I need to find love. Well, yes, you did need to find love, but you can't throw away You can't throw away. If you throw away your whole past, you're going to be throwing a piece of me away. And we read in these stories what happens when you don't honor the presence. So you can be over here and not honoring the presence, and you can be over here on the love side and you're still not honoring the presence, and guess what? You're still not okay. But it's so important that the first generation and the second generation understand what happened. Because when you do, and this is an individual thing because the Lord has to do the work. Everything I'm saying isn't going to instantly. This is something that you're going to have to, there's a cost. There's a cost to going deep into your heart and finding out what failed. And when it talks about that rebuilding that we have to do, we have to know what that is. And for every person, it can be a little bit different. Because, maybe some of them had the law and the love. And maybe some of them had the love, but not the law. And God says there's so many unique situations and so many unique hearts that it's an individual thing. And I can't do it for you. My husband couldn't do it for me, and I can't do it for him. It's going to take a deep, individual searching. But God says, it's time. It's time. The reconciliation, it's time. You have to understand because the days are short. You have to understand how important it is to host my presence. Because if you don't, it doesn't matter who you are or if you sit in a church or not, you're never going to be right. And so God said, Jenny, tell them, but you have to warn them too, because there's a lot. 3 years ago, when things broke up, God said, I had to make a way for so many people. And there are some people that stayed here. And there's a reason for that. And there are some people that wanted to stay here, but they thought, man, it's just something is off and I don't know. And I feel like if I stay, I'm like gonna corrupt myself. Like something's gonna happen and I'm gonna think wrongly about things. So you know what? I have to walk away, but I don't really want to, but I feel like I have to because it's the only way that I'm gonna feel like I'm gonna keep my heart right before the Lord. And then there are people that walked away and they had a fence with them. And they want to write off everything they've ever known. And God said, Jenny, you have to warn. He said, my mercy is great and I love every single one of them. But be careful. Be very careful. If you walk away and you say, I didn't need that, or those initial feelings that you had, because I was in it. Not all of it, but in it, and it's your job to find out what was and what wasn't. And then there are people, he said, that when they left, I moved them. They didn't have a wrong heart. It's because I needed to get them to the place that they needed to be that was going to advance my kingdom. And some of them weren't meant to stay here, because down the road, he said, you'll see it. Down the road, when they left, it was at my call. And they're doing something right now that down the road is going to help. Not just you, but the entire body of Christ all over. Because God has a plan. God knows his people. God knows their hearts. And he knows individually what he needs to do to save them, because it was never God's intention for anyone to go to hell. So God, in this 3 years, has had to do some very strategic, precise, and unique work. But the one thing that he said is, you have to tell them, you better honor each other. You better honor each other, because you're not walking someone else's walk. And you may say, well, I'm here, and you didn't do what I did, so that makes you wrong automatically. No, it doesn't. Why was it so important that Jesus said, on this law hang these two things? Do you know how important it is to honor your neighbor? I would say if the entire Old Covenant hangs, that's one of the things that hang on it, I would say it's something that we need to pay attention to. This is important, and I can't, as this came out, as the Lord, that morning that I woke up and he said, Psalms 91, I went on my porch again. And I grabbed my notebook and I thought, I'm going to go read it. And do you know that I ended up on that porch for 3 hours? And I was writing and writing and writing and writing. And that was the morning that it all came together. And I thought, oh my gosh, I know why that man spoke that to me. I know why I had the dream. It was like God said, Jenny, here's a crumb. And I'd get it. And he'd say, okay, I know if I tell her this, it's going to send her here. And then he'd send me over here. And he said, you know, if I tell her this, she's going to come here. And then she's just going to, and I know because she's so precise and she likes to record things and put dates. And I know that as I lead her down this trail, that it's going to go, aha. Because he knows us individually. And this last week, since we started prayer and fasting, of all the things that I have told you about, I have experienced, he said, Jenny, when you bring this, I have to make you feel every single thing that you're reading, because it's the only way that you're going to be able to explain it. And I tell you, there was 2 days that I was so, the weight on my chest, it was pressing. And it wasn't an evil oppression. It wasn't anything from the enemy. God was pressing so hard, and he said, Jenny, you've got to do the judgment thing. You got to tell him how important it is, because this is, and I knew I had to. And the fear of God, my body would shake. Sometimes I would shake for 10 minutes, and then it would stop, and then it'd come back again in an hour, and I would shake. And the fear of the Lord that shook me, he said, I'm going to shake you until you fully understand what I'm talking about. But then he said, I'm going to also let the love just wash over you, because he said, you're going to have to explain that. And then I'm going to place this sense of urgency inside of you, because you have to know that I am pressing on every one of your weaknesses, and I am challenging every weakness that you have to stand up and do this. So that urgency that I'm putting in you, I'm not going to stop till you do it. And something that's really important about why it is so important that the first generation and the second generation reconcile. It's for the third generation. Because I was 3 years ago, when this church fell apart, I was given a position at Belmont at the school. And for a year and a half, while this church was falling apart, you know who I saw every single day? I saw the third generation. And I tell you, it was like collapse. I saw kids that were friends for years. They were fighting. I saw kids that used to sit in this building and they say, oh, that place. And then on the other side, you'd see kids that come here and they say, oh, you guys. God said, Jenny, you have to explain the importance of the reconciliation of the first and the second generation, because the third generation is counting on it. They have got to see the whole counsel of God given to them in the right way, because, Jenny, I have a plan, and it involves all 3 generations. So I can't express to you how important it is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and strength. And how important it is to love your neighbor. And to understand how important it is and how sacred that secret place is. The presence of the Lord. And it says, in the presence of the Lord, there's healing. In the presence of the Lord, there's deliverance. Have we not sat in this house for the last 3 years and said, Lord, we need healing? Have we not seen countless individuals that needed healing? And we're praying. We have to learn to host the presence, because that's where you're going to find the healing. That's where you're going to find the deliverance. I can't tell you, night and day, I haven't slept this week because I can't. I lay in bed at night and he just rolls through me, just downloading. And my chest gets so hot that I start sweating at night. And I wake up continually. Because it's that urgent. Because it's that urgent. Because my children are counting on it. God has a plan. And we have to get to a higher level and look down at this thing. He's calling us to a higher perspective, because when you're down here, that's where you see the discord. But he says, listen, I haven't left this place. I want to be here. I haven't left. But I also didn't leave the presence of some of them that I sent out. But I want to do something here, but I had to send you into such a severe drought. And it had to get so desperate because sometimes that's what it takes. But I have mercy. We have Jesus. So we can't be afraid. We have the comfort that we can go to the hard things and know that God will give us an answer. And I wanted to read Malachi 4. It says, "For behold, the day cometh that shall burn as an oven, and all the proud, yea, and all that do wickedly, shall be stubble. And the day that cometh shall burn them up, saith the Lord of hosts, that it shall leave them neither root nor branch. But unto you," listen to this, "that fear my name, shall the Son of Righteousness arise with healing in his wings. And ye shall go forth and grow up as calves of the stall, and ye shall tread down the wicked, for they shall be ashes under the soles of your feet in the day that I shall do this, saith the Lord of hosts. Remember ye the law of Moses my servant, which I commanded unto him in Hebron, for all Israel, with the statutes and judgments. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And what is that spirit of Elijah supposed to do? He shall turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to the fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse." He said, "Jenny, it's that important, because there's a day coming, and it is coming, and it will happen, that will burn like an oven. And if the hearts of the fathers aren't reconciled to the hearts of the children, and the hearts of the children to the fathers, it doesn't sound like a good outcome." He just said, you have to express the importance of this reconciliation between the first and second generation, because the third generation is counting on it. And as I went through this week, I was like, God, I said, why do you want me to do this? I don't do stuff like this. Number one, I'm a girl. Which God doesn't care, because he has male and female traits. You need all of it. I said, and as I was thinking on this, I just said, God, I'm just the daughter of Larry and Diane. And I'm just the wife to Kevin. And I'm just the mom to Michael, Dylan, and Ashlyn. Why me? Why me, God? Because this is hard. Because you're asking me to stand up and say some really harsh things. But God said, you have to. And he said, Jenny, just like I told you it was so important to find out the players in those stories, he said, it's important that you know where you come from. And he said, it's because you're the daughter of Larry and Diane that you can do this. He said, because you were born into the home of believers. And I knew the hearts of your parents. And I said, boy, I can combine some of that and I can make something really beautiful. And he said, you know, your gift of music and your gift of storytelling and just the odd ways that you connect things. He said, you get that from your dad. And he said, and then you have this side of you that you get from your mom. And he said, your mom has put a heart in you like none other, because it's her heart. And she has put such a care for attention to detail in your life, because that's how she is. And the Lord just, and I said, God, why do you want me to be so personal? And he said, because you need to be. And I just have to tell you a few things that I know about my mom. My mom, when she cooks, I'll ask for forgiveness later. When she cooks and she's making cookies, and I've seen her do this my whole life, and it calls for butter. She gets the butter out of the fridge, and she looks at the wrapper, and wouldn't you know it, that manufacturer does not know how to line things up. So what does she do? No, she doesn't guess on how much. It calls for 2 tablespoons, and by golly, you are going to get 2 tablespoons of butter in that recipe. So what does she do? She unwraps it, she lines it back up right, closes the wrapper again, and she cuts it at 2 tablespoons. And you have 2 tablespoons, and you probably could measure it, and it would be that precise. And another thing, as I was thinking about my mom worked at a bank for years. She worked in the accounting department. This is before they had computers, and they had you had to use adding machines, and she would chase a penny because she had to. Because at a bank, you have to account for every single bit of money there. And she told me once, when I was younger, she said, you know, sometimes when you're trying to balance and you're off by 1 penny, and I'm like, yeah, well, that's not that big a deal. She goes, no, it actually is. And you know why? Because that penny can represent a lost entry that could be $1 million. And this other entry could be that much, because you have to chase the penny, because when you find out why, it could be a way bigger deal. And that's a big deal when you're in the auditing department of a bank. And God said, Jenny, your precision you get from your mom. And he said, it's because you are their daughter. And of the things, he said, that I built into your DNA, he said, that's why you can stand up there. Because I know, as your mom chases that penny, all I have to do is drop a breadcrumb, and you are going to chase that little bugger down until you figure out what it means. And when someone says to you, I'm not raining on something on purpose, well, guess who's going to chase it and not be satisfied until they find it? The daughter of Diane will do that. And he just said, I made you. Because I have a real, because of how precise my mom is, I don't break rank in things. I never have. Even as a kid, I would actually tell on myself. Like I would do something, and my mom would say, yeah, I could just see the look on your face, and I wouldn't say anything, because she said, I knew it was a matter of time, because you couldn't sit still. And then you'd come to me and say, oh my gosh, here's what I did. But I was born into a household of believers, and God knew how special they were, and he knew how special he had made me, just like he's made you that special. But somebody else knew that as well. The enemy did. He knew the good ground in my parents' heart, and he knew what God had made and designed in me. And he set out and tried to change the course of my life. So as I grew up, at 6, I became a child of a family that was now out of balance, because I wasn't seeing both parts every single day of my life. And then he brought me to a church that was out of balance. But it started right. The devil knows where the good ground is. And he said, people have to quit blaming each other, and they need to blame the one that is supposed to have the blame, the one that has gotten in, which is the enemy. And what's the first thing the enemy wants to do? He wants you to blame each other. But God said, Jenny, I have had my hand on you your whole life because I saw I saw that there was trouble on the road for you. And he said, and I began making a plan to have you right where I needed you, right when I needed you. And he said, and that's why you're the wife of Kevin. Because I saw that you were going to walk through some really hard places and that you were going to go through some things that would break you. And I needed to get you with somebody that would be so gentle with you. And I had to find the right person. And he said, and that's why I sent him. And I tell you, this summer we'll have been married 25 years, and not one single day of my marriage has that man ever raised his voice at me. God knew what I needed because he said, he saw that there was going to be a time in my life that things were going to get really bad. And he thought, I've got to keep her close to the heart of her mother. I got to keep her close to her heart because she is going to go through some really hard times. And he said, I got to keep her there because when it's that bad, it's the prayer of her mother that's going to save her. God has a plan. And when the enemy comes in and tries to change the plan, God didn't plan for me to grow up in an out of balance house. He didn't plan for me to put me in a church that was out of balance. God doesn't do things like that. We have to understand who does. It's the enemy. It's not people. And then he said, as you asked me about your kids, why are you the mother to Michael, Dylan, and Ashlyn? And he said, it is so important for this third generation. He said, but Jenny, I need you to see something. When you look at your oldest son, his precision to detail when he writes, if he writes it and it doesn't look perfectly straight, guess what he does? He erases it and does it again. And since he was a little boy, he has hummed, and he said, there's a gift of music in there somewhere. And your son Dylan, since he was little, he said there's been a heart in him that he can see people. And stealthily, without even knowing it, he'll go and he'll fix situations for people because he sees them. And he said, it's in there because of you. And your daughter is so caring, and people, the little kids just love her, and her creativity, it's you. And he said, Jenny, don't you worry about your children, because I designed them, and I have a plan for them, just like I had a plan for you, just like I had a plan for this church. And to wrap this up, something happened here Thursday night that has never happened in this church before. And as I knew what I was supposed to say, I said, God, there's one thing that's keeping me back. Are the people ready? I said, I have to know the heart of the people because some of these things are going to be hard. And when I came Thursday night to the prayer meeting, I was sitting over there, and God said, Jenny, go sit in the back. I need you to look from a different perspective. And he said, you're not going to need your eyes or your mouth. He said, just use your ears. And I sat in this section in the back row, and I just went there and I sat. I didn't talk. I didn't look. I used my ears. And as people would walk around this room, I heard the heart of the people. Because when they walked, I heard what they said. I heard what they were praying, and God said, Jenny, this is what I see. And I hear every one of their prayers. He said, so be assured, the heart of the people is ready. And as I sat there, I only opened my eyes once, or just a few times, but the one time I opened my eyes, this is what the Lord showed me. And I couldn't sleep Thursday night, and I got up and I had to write about it. I'm just going to read what I wrote in my notebook. I sat in the back of the church, and I looked over all the people there. And Vonnie Silvis, one of the oldest members of our church, was walking round and round the room praying with her hands in the air, shaking. And I said, God, I stayed for her. And I looked again, and I saw Luke Garcia, who represented in the room that night, one of the younger members of the church. And he's someone that I didn't know real well, except for these last 3 years. And I have been able to witness such a drastic change in his life over these 3 years. And I said, God, I stayed for him. Because God has a plan for all of us. Some of us needed to stay. Some of us needed to go. Some of us were so damaged that we had to be tucked away somewhere till we could start the healing process. And it's not up to us to decide how God chooses to heal someone, because we can't do the work ourselves anyway. So we have to quit judging other people as to how God wants to help them, because, again, we're not honoring the Lord then. And at one point, I could feel a presence enter to this room. And when I opened my eyes, the people that were here had gathered right in this area. And they were on their faces, and they were pounding the ground. And I was sitting back there. And I tell you, a presence swept through this room, and it racked me in my chair. I was shaking. I couldn't stand it, and I thought, oh God, I got to get down to that altar because there's something happening there. And I stood up, and I started walking down this aisle. And I got to right here, and the presence was so strong that I hit my knees right here. And when I hit my knees there, God overtook my tongue. I could not control my tongue. And a new tongue that I have never spoke before came out. And this only lasted for a minute or two because the presence was so strong that I was on my hands and knees, and then it went boom, and I collapsed. And I don't even know how long I was on the floor, but I completely collapsed on the floor. And there's been only one other time in my life that has happened, that God has radically took over my tongue. And it was over here. Right here. During a revival we had last year. And that night, Roger Webb, who was sent to us, stood here, and he said, I'm going to get some people out of the crowd. I'm going to send them out, and when they're going to know who to call and send them up here. So I got up here, and I didn't know why I was there. But then he said, the reason that you are all up here is because for your whole life, you've been misunderstood. You haven't been used. And God is saying, He wants to say yes. He says, you are approved. I say yes. And I cried like I've never cried before. And I collapsed on the floor. And in front of me, somebody else collapsed. It's the guy on the Nord there, Michael. And he collapsed in front of me. And as we were down there, I reached out. He was shaking so uncontrollably. As I'm flat on my stomach, I reached my hands out to grab his hands. And we had our hands clutched, and we were probably there an hour. And at one point, the Lord overtook my tongue. I was still and flat. And uncontrollably for over an hour, I spoke out in tongues and something happened. And the only thing that I said while I was on the ground, at one point I looked up at Michael and I said, Michael, I think God wants us to share our gifts. I said, I need your music and you need my words. And I collapsed on the floor again. And God said, Jenny, when you come and do this on Sunday, I need that guy on the stage because he can usher in the presence. And it's not an accident that Mike Handy's on this stage, because there's two things. I have one more verse that I'm going to share with everyone, and there were two things that the Lord said to do after I share this verse. And one of them was to share the song that he had given me almost 3 years ago when this collapse happened. I left this church one Saturday morning and I went home and I prayed like I'd never prayed before, because I was in crisis mode, because I was seeing the ripping and the tearing. And I got on my knees, and after 30 minutes, God said, pick up a pen and paper. And in 10 minutes, I wrote a song. I didn't write it. It was downloaded into me. And this song, I didn't actually sing it for a year and a half. And the first time I sang it was when Dan Muller was here. And the Lord was pressing on me that week. He said, you need to sing the song. And he said, Jenny, we're on to the second reason as to why you're able to stand up here and do this today. Because of that song. He said, it's because you asked me. I said, why, God? Why do you want me to do this? And he said, because you asked me to be a bridge. And he said, Jenny, this week, it may have taken 3 years. He said, but I answered the prayer to that song. Because I have a plan. Guys, that wasn't my song. That was the song that the Lord downloaded to this church. A song that when Dan Muller came was the start. The first time I sang that, Dan changed his preaching because God said, I have a plan. So I'm going to break tradition. And Dan, what you came in here to say, you're going to do something different because she's got a song. And it's a song that's going to carry this church. And it's going to be the song that helps heal them. And the second time I sang that song was at the revival. And so I thought, oh my gosh, I did ask that, Lord, and you answered. So for me doing this, I have to do this because it's what I asked, and he's so good, he honored it. So I'm going to read, as I was going through this, there was one other verse or section of verses that he wanted me to read, and he said, Jenny, when you read this, you're going to know that you're done. But he said, then there's 2 songs that I want you to do. So after I finish reading this, they're going to play a song just over the loudspeakers. And I said, when I heard it this week, I'd never heard this song before. I thought, oh my gosh, this explains the whole 3-year drought and what we have been doing to try to get out of it. And I thought, oh, I got to call Azzy. And I got to get Mike. And the Lord said, no. He said, my worship team has been battling on the front lines for a long time. And he said, not only that, he said, but this week I'm asking even more of them. And he said, so no, you just play that song over the speakers, because he said, I want my team to come in and rest today. And the final verse that the Lord said he wanted me to share is Revelation 3, verses 7 through 13. And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, these things saith he that is holy, he that is true, he that hath the key of David. He that openeth, and no man shutteth, and shutteth, and no man openeth. I know thy works. Behold, I have set before thee an open door, and no man can shut it. For thou hast a little strength, and hast kept my word, and hast not denied my name. Behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews, and are not, but do lie. Behold, I will make them to come and worship before thy feet, and to know that I have loved thee. Because thou hast kept the word of my patience, I will also keep thee from the hour of temptation, which shall come before all the world, and to try them that dwell upon the earth. Behold, I come quickly. Hold that fast which thou hast, that no man take thy crown. He that overcometh will I make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go no more out, and I will write upon him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, which is New Jerusalem, which cometh down out of heaven from my God, and I will write upon him a new name. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. And while I was collapsed on that floor Thursday night, one of our worshipers got up in rejoicing, and she said, I see the cloud. I see the cloud the size of a man's hand. I see the cloud the size of a man's hand. And what did that signal for Elijah? The drought is over. The drought is over. And that same person that I heard, I was collapsed. I couldn't move my body. I was collapsed on the ground. And the same person that got that, after I finally was able to get up out of my chair, and I sat right where my husband's sitting right now, and I thought, oh, and everyone was just standing, and I thought they were waiting for me to get up. I don't know how long I've been down here. And I thought, okay, they're probably waiting to see what comes out of my mouth, because this was like quite powerful. We've never experienced this before. God, what am I supposed to say? What are the first words to come out? And she gets up off the step and she walks over to me. She sits here and she leans back. She goes, hey, Jenny. She said, are you okay? And I said, yeah, I'm okay. And she said, hey, the Lord spoke to me. She said, while I was sitting on that step, and he wanted me to tell you something. He says you're a rainmaker. And he says he's going to send you into the dry places, and you're going to be able to call in the rain. She said, but don't quote me on this. This whole prophecy thing is really new to me. She had no idea. She saw the cloud the size of a man's hand. And then as I was asking the Lord, what do I need to say? What should I say? And he said, tell them you have the key. I've given them the key. So as Mindy sat there, I said, hey, Mindy. I said, we have the key. He gave us the key tonight. Because it was so powerful. I've never experienced it in my life. And God said, I'm going to give you permission to say something. This house was not built for a man. This house was built for God. And this house has been marked by God. And the reason he's marked this house is because of the good ground that started in the first generation. It was that precious, but it was also that important that the devil snuff it out. We saw the cloud in the sky. The rain is coming. The rain is coming. And God says, you have a span. He said, Jenny, you're the early warning watchman. Take heed to the things that I've shown you, because the rain is coming, and you need to know how to handle my presence, because he said, I am here. So dig deep and search what God wants for you. Because I can stand here in full confidence of my God. The rain is coming. The drought is over. if they want to start this song, the Lord said, I need you to play this song, and I need you to put the words on the screen, because a lot of people might not know this song, but he said the words of this song are so important that they hear. And he said, some of the people in this room that the most important to is my worship team. He said, so this is my way of honoring those Levites that for 3 years have carried the presence of the Lord on their shoulders to usher it in. And he said, this is my way of honoring all of the hearts and the work that have labored. So if you guys want to start that. And then after that, he said, Jenny, I need you to sing your song. Because the reason I had to give so much detail to this is there's been a connection lacking on what's been wrong and how to fix it. And he said, you need to go detail by line, and explain how you got the answer, because what you're doing is you're teaching the people. And he said, and I want you to end with singing your song. He said, because it's because of that song, that is the prostrate of the heart. When you enter a dry season, this is what you need to start singing. So we're going to listen to this song, and then I'm going to sing my song, and then the Lord said that I'm done today. Now I'm going to sing this song, and the reason that Mike is up here is because, number one, every time that I've sang it, he's been the one that's played it, so he knows it, and we've done this several times. But God said, no, that's not the only reason why Mike is up here. He said, I want my people to see the first generation training the second generation how to do it. So I'm going to sing the song, the prayer that began at this drum, so that you'll know how to pray. To see through your eyes, for with your eyes I will see clear. I want to feel with your heart, for your love it will be there. I want to reach with your hand to be a bridge that leads to you. To walk in a path that reaches you. When you go before me, I know my way is sure. When you lead and guide me, I know your presence they will feel. Be just like you. I wanna be just like you. I wanna be just like you. Make my words to always give life, to lift up someone in need, and take my thoughts and make them understand.